What's the most disturbing thing you found in your attic? My mother started going up to our attic every night at exactly 11:47 p.m., and when I asked about it, she pretended she didn't know what I was talking about. She'd wait until she thought everyone was asleep. Then I'd hear the attic ladder slowly extending, her careful footsteps on the creaky rungs, then silence for exactly 1 hour before she'd come back down. At first I thought maybe she was hiding Christmas presents or working on some surprise project. But this was July, and the way she moved was too careful, too quiet, like she was visiting something that couldn't be disturbed. I started timing her. Every single night, 11:47 p.m., never 11:46 or 11:48. She'd stand at the bottom of the ladder for a full minute before climbing, like she was gathering courage. When she came down, her eyes were always red, her hands shaking. "Mom, why do you go to the attic every night?" I asked one morning. She dropped her coffee mug, shattering it on the kitchen floor. "I don't." "You must be dreaming." But there was dust in her hair, that specific attic dust that smells like old insulation and forgotten years. I tried following her once, but she must have heard me because she came back down immediately, walked straight to my room, and stood in my doorway. Some things are private, Arnie. Even from family. Especially from family. The next day, she installed a padlock on the attic door. I became obsessed with knowing what was up there. When she was at work, I tried picking the lock, tried removing the door hinges, even tried accessing the attic through the roof. Nothing worked. She'd reinforced everything. But I noticed other things. She'd started buying children's clothes at Goodwill, small sizes, like for a 7 or 8-year-old. She'd wash them carefully, fold them perfectly, then they'd disappear. She was buying specific foods too. Juice boxes, string cheese, goldfish crackers, kid foods. They'd vanish from the pantry within hours. One night I stayed awake, phone recording through a crack in my door. At 11:47 she went up. But this time I heard something different. Voices. Soft conversation. My mother talking to someone in the gentlest voice I'd ever heard her use. "I know you're scared," she was saying, "but you're safe here. No one will find you." A child's voice responded, but I couldn't make out the words. My blood went cold. She was keeping a child in our attic. I called my dad, who'd moved out 2 years ago. "Dad, I think Mom has someone in the attic." Long pause. "Arnie, leave it alone." "You know about this?" "It's complicated. Your mother, she's protecting someone who can't protect themselves. That's all you need to know." But I had to know more. I searched Mom's room while she was at her book club, found a folder hidden behind other files labeled insurance stocks. Inside were newspaper clippings from 3 years ago. Local boy, 8, missing after house fire. Parents die in blaze, child's body never found. Investigators suspect arson and deadly fire. The boy's name was Tommy Fowler. The photos showed a small kid with a gap-toothed smile. His parents had been killed when their house was deliberately set on fire. Tommy was presumed dead, but his body was never recovered. At the bottom of the folder, he saw who did it. They'll kill him if they find him. At 11:47, Mom appeared with her keys. She saw me and froze. "Mom, is Tommy Fowler in our attic?" "How do you... 3 years?" "They're still looking for him." "The people who killed his parents?" Sirens. Everywhere. Getting closer. Mom's phone rang. She answered and went white. "They found us." She ran to the attic door. "We have to get him out now." But when she opened it, Tommy wasn't there. Instead, there were dozens of monitors showing every room in our house, recording equipment, files on 20 different missing children, and a note in Tommy's handwriting. "Your mom didn't save me. She took me, just like she took the others." I stand frozen in the attic doorway staring at the monitors and equipment, my brain refusing to process what I'm seeing. The sirens are getting closer and my mother is screaming something behind me, but all I can focus on is Tommy's note in my shaking hands. The paper feels thin and fragile, like it might disintegrate if I grip it too hard, and the handwriting is shaky and small, like a scared kid wrote it while hiding. My eyes keep moving between the note and the screens showing our kitchen, our living room, my bedroom, every private space recorded and watched. There are file folders stacked on a metal shelf, each one labeled with a name I don't recognize, and I realize these are the other children, the ones Tommy mentioned, the ones my mother took. My stomach twists and I taste something sour in my throat, but I can't look away from the evidence of what she's been doing for years while I live downstairs completely unaware. The monitors flicker with empty rooms because we're all up here now, but I can imagine what they usually show. My mother watching me sleep and eat and live my life without knowing I was observed. My mother grabs my arm trying to pull me away from the attic, but I jerk free and stumble down the ladder with the note clutched against my chest. She's crying and begging me to let her explain, but there's nothing she could say that would make this okay. Her fingers catch my shirt, and I hear fabric tear as I yank myself away, nearly falling as my foot slips on one of the ladder rungs. She's saying my name over and over, this desperate pleading sound that makes my skin crawl because how can she sound so hurt when she's the one who did all of this? I hit the hallway floor hard and my ankle twists, but I barely feel it, too focused on getting away from her and the horror in that attic. She's climbing down after me, moving faster than I've ever seen her move, and her face is red and wet with tears that seem completely wrong given what I just discovered. I run to my room and lock the door while my mother pounds on it, her voice switching between pleading and angry. The sirens stop right outside our house and I hear car doors slamming, heavy footsteps on the porch. My door shakes with each impact of her fists, and I back away until I hit my bed, still holding Tommy's note like it's the only real thing in the world. She's begging me to open the door, saying she can explain everything, that I don't understand what I saw up there. Then her voice changes and she's yelling that I'm being stupid, that I'm going to ruin everything, that those children needed her help and I'm too young to understand. The contradiction makes me feel sick because which is it? Was she helping them or hurting them? And how can she not see that keeping kids locked in an attic is wrong no matter what story she tells herself? Through my window, I see 3 police cars and officers approaching our front door with hands on their weapons. My mother stops pounding on my door and I hear her footsteps rushing downstairs, probably to intercept them before they come inside. I move to my window and watch 4 officers walking up our front path, their faces serious and alert, and I wonder who called them and how they knew to come here tonight. One officer has his radio out and he's talking into it while scanning our house like he's looking for threats. Another officer positions herself to the side of the front door, her hand resting on her gun, and I realize they think this might be dangerous. The doorbell rings and I hear my mother's footsteps pause at the bottom of the stairs, and I imagine her taking a breath and smoothing her hair and putting on whatever face she thinks will work best. I unlock my door and creep to the top of the stairs, watching as my mother opens the front door acting confused and concerned. She's asking the officers what's wrong in this perfectly innocent voice, like she's just a worried suburban mom and not whatever monster she actually is. Her posture is different now, shoulders back and head tilted, and she's even smiling a little like she's happy to help with whatever brought them here. The lead officer, a tall man with gray hair, asks if everything is all right and if anyone called for help from this address. My mother shakes her head and laughs this light, confused laugh that sounds so fake to me now, but probably seems normal to them. She's good at this, I realize, good at pretending to be something she's not, and I wonder how many times she's lied to me with that same easy smile. One of the officers asks if they can come inside, and my mother hesitates for just a second before stepping back to let them in. I can see her calculating, trying to figure out what they know and what story she needs to tell. Her eyes flick up toward the stairs where I'm hiding, and I pull back slightly, not ready to reveal myself yet. The officers file into our entryway, their boots heavy on our hardwood floor, and they're looking around at our normal, boring house that hides such terrible secrets. My mother is talking about how quiet the evening has been, how she can't imagine why anyone would call the police, and her voice is so calm and reasonable that I almost doubt what I saw upstairs. But I can still feel Tommy's note in my hand, the paper now damp from my sweaty palm, and I know what's real. I walk down the stairs and all the officers look up at me, and one of them asks if I'm Arnie. My mother's face goes white when I nod, and I realize she knows I'm about to destroy everything she's built. The color drains from her cheeks and her mouth opens slightly, and for a second she looks terrified instead of in control. Her eyes are locked on mine, and I can see her trying to send me some kind of message, maybe warning me or begging me, but I look away because I can't stand to see her face anymore. The female officer steps forward and asks if I'm okay, if anyone has hurt me, and her voice is gentle in a way that makes my eyes sting with tears I won't let fall. I hold up Tommy's note and tell the officers they need to see the attic right now. My mother starts talking fast about how I'm confused and upset, how I don't understand what I saw, but her voice sounds desperate and wrong. She's moving toward me, and the lead officer steps between us, his hand out in a stopping motion. My mother's words are tumbling over each other, something about a misunderstanding and teenage drama, and how I've been stressed lately, and I can hear the panic underneath her attempt at sounding reasonable. She reaches for the note in my hand, but I pull it back and the officer takes it from me, his eyes scanning the words while his expression hardens. The lead officer asks my mother for permission to search the attic, and she refuses, saying they need a warrant. He looks at me and asks if I live here too, and when I say yes, he asks if I give permission to search my home. My mother's face twists into something ugly, and she starts yelling about how I'm a minor and can't give legal consent, how they're violating her rights. But the officer is already radioing for backup and asking another officer to keep my mother in the living room while they go upstairs. I say yes immediately, and my mother lunges toward me screaming that I don't know what I'm doing. 2 officers grab her arms and she's suddenly fighting them like a wild animal, all pretense of normalcy completely gone. She's thrashing and kicking, and her voice is this horrible screeching sound that doesn't even sound human anymore. One officer is trying to calm her down while the other pulls out handcuffs, and my mother is screaming about how I've ruined everything, how those children needed her, how I'm too stupid to understand. Her shirt tears as she tries to wrench free, and her face is twisted with rage and something else, maybe fear, and I back away because I don't recognize this person at all. The officer with the gray hair pulls out handcuffs, and my mother's eyes go wide. She starts twisting and pulling, but the 2 officers hold her steady while the metal clicks around her wrists. She's sobbing now, these huge, gasping sounds that don't even sound like her anymore. She keeps screaming that I'm ruining everything, that I don't understand what she sacrificed to keep those children safe. The words make my stomach flip because she actually believes it. She thinks she was helping them somehow. Her face is red and wet and twisted up, and she's yelling about how ungrateful I am, how she protected them when no one else would. One officer guides her to the couch in the living room while she's still crying and shouting. The other 2 officers look at me, and the female one asks if I can show them the attic. My legs feel shaky, but I nod and lead them upstairs. The hallway seems longer than usual, and I can still hear my mother downstairs making these awful sounds. We reach the attic door, and I point to the padlock hanging open where my mother unlocked it earlier. The lead officer pulls out his flashlight and starts climbing the ladder. The other officer follows him up, and I stand there at the bottom listening to their boots on the wooden steps. Their flashlight beams sweep across the attic floor above me, and I hear one of them moving things around. Then the lead officer swears really loud, this shocked, angry sound. His radio crackles, and he's talking fast into it, saying they need backup right now and a forensic team. The words crime scene come through clear, and I feel cold all over. The female officer comes back down the ladder, and her face looks pale under the hallway light. She puts her hand on my shoulder gently and tells me I need to wait outside, that this is a crime scene now, and I can't be in the house. I turn and walk down the stairs in this weird daze where everything feels far away. My mother is still on the couch with an officer standing next to her, and she's staring at me with this desperate look. I grab my phone off the kitchen counter and my backpack from where I dropped it by the door. Then I walk outside, and the night air hits my face, and I realize I'm sweating. I sit down on the curb in front of our house and put my head in my hands. More sirens are coming, and I see red and blue lights reflecting off the houses down the street. 2 more police cars pull up, and then an unmarked black SUV. Officers get out and start talking to each other in low voices. Our neighbors are coming out onto their porches now, standing there in pajamas and robes looking at all the police cars. Mrs. Lugo from next door is staring right at our house with her hand over her mouth. I can't even process the shame of knowing what they're all about to learn. What they'll say about us, about me. A woman in regular clothes walks over from the black SUV and sits down on the curb next to me. She introduces herself as Detective Lorelei Thurman with the FBI. She asks if I'm okay, and I almost laugh because what a stupid question. But I can see in her face that she's trying to be kind, that she actually cares. She waits for me to say something, but I can't find words. Lorelei asks if I feel safe talking to her about what I found. My hands are still shaking when I pull out Tommy's note and hold it out to her. She takes it carefully and reads it, and I watch her face change. There's this flash of anger in her eyes before she controls it, and her mouth gets tight. She folds the note and asks if she can keep it as evidence, and I nod. Then I start talking, telling her everything from the beginning. The nightly visits at exactly 11:47. The padlock my mother installed. The children's clothes and food disappearing. The audio recording where I heard my mother talking to someone. Finding the newspaper clippings about Tommy Fowler and the fire that killed his parents. Lorelei listens without interrupting and writes things down in a small notebook. Something about how calm and focused she is helps me get through it without completely falling apart. When I finish, she asks if I know where my father is. I give her his phone number and explain that he moved out 2 years ago. Then I tell her that when I called him about this, he already knew. He told me to leave it alone, that my mother was protecting someone. Lorelei's expression gets hard when I say that, and she pulls out her radio. She calls for another agent to go pick up my father for questioning. A van pulls up, and people in white suits start carrying equipment toward our house. Another officer is putting up yellow crime scene tape across our front yard. Lorelei tells me I can't go back inside tonight and asks if there's someone I can stay with. I try to think of anyone, but my brain feels empty. My mother kept us away from extended family for years, always making excuses why we couldn't visit them or have them over. Now I understand why. I shake my head and tell Lorelei there's no one. She pulls out her phone and makes some calls, talking quietly to people I can't hear. When she hangs up, she explains that she's arranging for me to stay in temporary protective housing. She says I'm a witness, and they need to keep me safe until they understand everything my mother was doing. The word witness makes it feel real in a way it hadn't before. I'm not just her daughter anymore. I'm evidence. Another woman walks over from where she's been standing near one of the police cars. She introduces herself as Hallie Nichols and explains she's a victim advocate who'll help me through everything that's coming. Her eyes are soft when she looks at me, and she doesn't try to make me talk when I can't find words to answer her questions about how I'm doing. She just sits there on the curb next to me while officers move in and out of my house carrying equipment and taking photos. Lorelai talks with Hallie for a few minutes in low voices, and then they both help me up from the curb. Hallie says she's taking me somewhere safe for tonight and asks if I need anything from inside, but I shake my head because there's nothing in that house I want to touch ever again. We walk to her car and I get in the passenger seat while she drives through streets that look normal and peaceful, like the world didn't just end. She pulls up to a regular apartment building that could be anywhere, and tells me this is actually a safe house for witnesses and victims who need protection. We take an elevator to the 3rd floor, and she unlocks a door to a small apartment that looks generic and temporary, like a hotel room but with a tiny kitchen. She shows me where the bathroom is and where clean towels are stacked, and points out the bedroom with its plain blue bedspread. I stand in the middle of the living room feeling completely separate from my body, like I'm watching someone else go through these motions. Hallie leaves for a while and comes back with bags of food from some restaurant. She sets everything on the small kitchen table, but I can't make myself eat anything. I sit on the couch staring at the blank wall while my brain keeps trying to understand that my mother was hurting children in our attic while I slept in my bed downstairs. The guilt feels like it's crushing my chest and I can't breathe right. Hallie doesn't push me to eat or talk, just sits in the chair across from me and stays quiet. Hours pass in this weird fog where time doesn't feel real. Hallie makes tea that I don't drink and turns on the TV to some cooking show with the volume low. Around midnight, there's a knock on the door and Lorelai comes in looking tired and grim. Her face tells me the news is bad before she even opens her mouth to speak. She sits down on the couch next to me and says they found evidence in the attic of at least 15 different children over the past 8 years. They're working to identify all of them from the files and photos and items my mother kept. My hands start shaking and I press them between my knees to make them stop. Lorelai asks gentle questions about whether I ever heard anything strange at night or noticed people coming to the house at weird times. I start thinking back through the years and realize there were so many signs I missed. Times my mother suddenly insisted I go stay with friends for the weekend. Times she sent me to my dad's house, even when it wasn't his scheduled time. Weekends she told me to sleep over at other people's houses because she needed alone time. I was so stupid and blind, and those children were suffering while I was just living my normal life. I start crying and saying I should have known. I should have figured it out. How could I not notice what was happening in my own house? Lorelai stops me and says my mother was sophisticated and careful, that she deliberately manipulated me to keep me from discovering the truth. She explains that predators are experts at hiding in plain sight, and they're especially good at fooling their own families because we trust them and don't want to believe they're capable of evil. She says I was a victim too, that my mother used me as cover and made sure I never had reason to suspect. But it doesn't make the guilt go away because I still lived there and ate meals with her and talked about normal things while children were trapped upstairs. Lorelai's phone buzzes and she looks at it and then back at me. She tells me they picked up my father an hour ago and he's being questioned about his knowledge and involvement. The thought that both my parents were part of this makes my stomach turn, and I run to the bathroom and throw up until there's nothing left but dry heaving. I kneel on the cold tile floor with my head against the toilet and wonder how my entire family could be this broken without me ever seeing it. Hallie comes in and helps me up and gets me a wet washcloth for my face. She guides me to the bedroom and I lie down on top of the covers fully clothed. She tells me she'll be right outside if I need anything, and then closes the door most of the way, but leaves it cracked with light coming through. I lie there staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet sounds of Hallie moving around in the living room. Every time I close my eyes, I see those monitors showing every room of our house and Tommy's note saying my mother took him. I wonder how many children suffered while I was downstairs doing homework or watching TV or sleeping. I wonder which weekends I was sent away, so she could do things I can't even let myself imagine. The guilt is so heavy I can barely breathe, and I keep thinking about all the times I complained about being sent to stay with friends or having to go to my dad's. All the times I was annoyed at my mother for making me leave, when maybe if I'd stayed, I could have heard something or seen something that would have made me call the police sooner. I hear Hallie's phone ring softly in the other room, and her quiet voice talking to someone. The apartment is so silent otherwise that every small sound feels loud. A car drives by outside and headlights sweep across the ceiling. I pull the blanket over me even though I'm not cold and curl up on my side. Morning light comes through the thin curtains and I realize I never actually slept. Hallie is already awake in the living room and I can smell coffee. I get up and use the bathroom and wash my face with cold water that doesn't make me feel any more real. When I come out, Lorelai is there again with another woman she introduces as Giovanna Thurman. She explains that Giovanna is her wife and a forensic psychologist who works with child exploitation cases. Giovanna's presence feels different from Lorelai's intensity, calmer somehow, and when she looks at me, her eyes are kind, but also sharp, like she sees more than I'm saying. They both sit down and I take the chair across from them while Hallie brings me orange juice I don't want. Lorelai explains that my father admitted to knowing my mother was keeping Tommy in the attic, but he claimed he believed her story about witness protection. He told them he trusted her judgment and didn't ask questions because he didn't want to know details that might make him legally responsible if anything went wrong. Giovanna watches my face while Lorelai talks, and I can tell she's analyzing my reactions and processing what they mean. My father knew, and he left me in that house anyway. He knew children were being kept upstairs, and he just walked away and pretended everything was fine as long as he didn't have to see it himself. Giovanna shifts forward in her chair, and her hands fold together in that careful way therapists have when they're about to say something I won't want to hear. She tells me my father will probably face charges for not reporting what he knew, and maybe even being an accessory depending on what else they find out during the investigation. Her eyes stay fixed on my face while she talks, and I can tell she's watching every tiny reaction I have, measuring how I'm handling the fact that both my parents betrayed me in different ways. I stare at the wall behind her head because looking at her feels like too much right now. My father knew children were suffering, and he just pretended everything was fine as long as he didn't have to see it himself, and somehow that feels worse than my mother's active cruelty, because at least she was honest about being a monster. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Lorelai leans back against the couch cushions and says they're actively searching for Tommy right now and working to identify all the other children from the files and equipment they found in the attic. Some of the missing children cases go back almost 10 years, from before we even lived in that house, which means my mother was doing this long before I was born. The room feels smaller suddenly, like the walls are pressing in, and I realize my mother built her entire life around hurting children, that being my mom was just the cover story for her real purpose. I ask if Tommy is actually alive, and my voice comes out quieter than I meant it to. Lorelai says they don't know for sure yet because his note suggests he got away, but they haven't found him anywhere. She pulls out her phone and shows me a photo of Tommy from 3 years ago, this little kid with dark hair and a smile that doesn't reach his eyes even in the picture. She asks if I ever saw him around the neighborhood or noticed him near our house, but I shake my head because I don't recognize him at all. The guilt hits me again knowing he was trapped above my bedroom for years while I complained about homework and argued with my mother about normal teenage things. The next week passes in this weird blur where I stay in the safe house watching everything fall apart on the news. Every channel describes my mother as a monster, and our house as a chamber of horrors, and reporters camp outside, showing footage of the crime scene tape and forensic teams carrying evidence boxes. Hallie keeps trying to get me to stop watching, but I can't look away because I need to understand how big this is. How many lives my mother destroyed while I was downstairs eating cereal and doing homework like everything was normal. The news shows photos of missing children, and I recognize some of the faces from the files in the attic, and each one makes me feel sicker because these were real kids with families who loved them. I sleep maybe 2 hours a night, and when I do, I dream about the monitors showing every room of our house, about my mother watching me while I slept and ate, and lived my life completely unaware. Hallie brings me food, but I barely eat, and she doesn't push. Just sits with me while I stare at the TV or the wall or nothing at all. Lorelai visits every few days with updates, and each one is somehow worse than the last. More children identified from the files and evidence, more proof of long-term captivity and abuse, more details about what my mother did that I wish I could unhear but can't forget. She's always gentle when she tells me things, but she doesn't try to hide the truth or make it sound less terrible than it is. One afternoon, she tells me they found evidence of at least 4 children who died while in my mother's captivity, and my hands start shaking. So bad I have to sit on them. Lorelai sits next to me and doesn't try to make me feel better because there's nothing that could make this better. She just stays there while I cry. On Tuesday morning, Lorelai shows up earlier than usual and her face looks different, almost relieved. She tells me they found Tommy living on the streets downtown, and when they approached him, he ran at first because he was terrified. It took 3 officers and a social worker almost an hour to convince him he was actually safe this time and not being taken back to my mother. Lorelai says he escaped 2 weeks ago when my mother got careless with the attic lock during one of her visits, and he's been hiding in alleys and abandoned buildings ever since, too scared to go to the police because he didn't know who he could trust. I ask if he's okay now, and Lorelai says physically he's malnourished and has some injuries, but nothing life-threatening. Emotionally is a different story, but at least he's safe and getting help. She tells me Tommy confirmed everything they suspected and more. My mother took him the night of the fire that killed his parents, and she was the one who set that fire in the first place. His parents had discovered her following Tommy home from the school multiple times and confronted her, threatened to call the police if she didn't stay away from their son. So my mother waited until late that night and set their house on fire while they slept, then grabbed Tommy when he tried to escape and made everyone think he died in the blaze. He saw everything, watched his parents die, and she couldn't let him tell anyone, so she took him and kept him for 3 years. Lorelai's voice stays steady while she tells me this, but I can see the anger in her eyes, the way her jaw tightens when she talks about what my mother did. Through Tommy's information and all the files they found, they've identified 12 other victims over the years. Some were released when they got too old and my mother got bored with them. Some died in captivity. Some are still missing and might never be found. Each name Lorelai reads feels like another weight pressing down on my chest, another life destroyed by the woman who raised me. Giovanna starts coming to see me every other day for what she calls therapy sessions, but feel more like someone trying to teach me how to breathe again. She helps me understand that my mother's crimes aren't my fault, even though I lived in that house. That the manipulation and lies damaged me too, even if the abuse wasn't aimed at me directly. She explains that I'm a victim of my mother's deception, that children aren't responsible for recognizing when their parents are monsters. We talk about guilt and shame and how to separate my identity from what my mother did, but it all feels impossible because how do I explain to anyone that I didn't know, that I never suspected when the evidence was literally above my head? Giovanna is patient and doesn't rush me to feel better or move on, just sits with me in the mess of it all and helps me find words for things I didn't know how to name. One afternoon, a man in a suit shows up with Lorelai and introduces himself as Remy, the prosecutor handling my mother's case. He has kind eyes but a serious voice when he explains that I'll need to testify about what I discovered and what I knew before that night. He promises to prepare me completely and protect me as much as possible during the legal process, but I can tell from his face that it's going to be hard. Remy asks me detailed questions about my mother's routines and behaviors, about when I first noticed the attic visits and what made me suspicious. I answer everything as honestly as I can, even though talking about it makes me want to throw up again. He takes notes and nods and tells me I'm being very brave, but I don't feel brave at all, just broken and guilty and completely lost. The prosecutor's office calls me in 3 weeks after Tommy's rescue to go over the formal charges against my mother. Remy meets me in a small conference room with Hallie beside me for support, and he spreads out documents across the table showing counts I can barely process. Kidnapping, child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, murder in the second degree for 2 children who died while she held them. He explains each charge in detail, but I just stare at the papers, at my mother's name typed over and over in legal language that makes everything feel distant and unreal. He tells me the state is seeking life in prison without parole, that with the evidence they have, there's no possibility of a lighter sentence. I wait for something to hit me, some feeling of sadness or relief or anger, but there's just this hollow space where emotions should be. Remy asks if I have questions, and I shake my head, and Hallie squeezes my hand while I sign papers confirming I understand the charges and will cooperate with the prosecution. 2 days later, Hallie asks if I want to visit my father in jail, says he's been requesting to see me since his arrest. I refuse immediately, not even needing to think about it, because I can't face him right now or listen to whatever excuses he has for enabling this horror. Hallie nods like she expected that answer and tells me I can decide later if I want contact, that there's no rush to make that decision, and I shouldn't feel guilty either way. She explains that my father is cooperating with investigators and providing information about my mother's methods, but that doesn't change what he did or didn't do. I ask if he'll go to prison too, and she says probably, that the prosecutor is building a case for accessory charges and failure to report. Part of me wants him to suffer for knowing and doing nothing, but mostly I just feel tired and done with both of them. Hallie connects me with Isabella Fry the following week, a therapist who works specifically with family trauma and betrayal cases. Isabella's office is quiet and comfortable with soft lighting and tissues on every surface, and she starts by asking me to tell her whatever I feel ready to share. I talk about the attic visits and finding Tommy's note and discovering those files, and she listens without interrupting or looking shocked. We meet twice a week, and slowly I start processing the reality that the mother I knew never really existed, that the woman who made me breakfast and helped with homework was also capable of unthinkable cruelty. Isabella helps me understand that people can be multiple things at once, that my mother being kind to me doesn't erase what she did to those children. She explains that predators often maintain normal family lives as cover for their crimes, that they're experts at compartmentalizing and appearing ordinary. During one session, I break down crying because I can't reconcile the 2 versions of my mother in my head, and Isabella just sits with me in that pain without trying to fix it or make it better. Remy calls me a month after the charges were filed to tell me that 3 of the surviving victims who my mother released years ago have come forward after seeing the news coverage. These are kids who aged out of whatever sick criteria my mother had, who she let go with threats to keep them silent about what happened. Their testimonies provide crucial evidence about the pattern and duration of her crimes, confirming that this went back at least a decade before we even moved into that house. Remy says their courage is remarkable, that coming forward after years of silence takes incredible strength, and will ensure my mother never walks free. He asks if I want to meet them, and I say no, not yet, because I'm not ready to face the people she hurt while I lived there completely unaware. He understands and tells me the offer stands whenever I'm ready, that they don't blame me for what my mother did. 6 weeks after my mother's arrest, Hallie tells me I can go back to the house with police escort to pack my belongings. We drive there on a Tuesday morning and the yellow crime scene tape is gone, but the house still looks wrong, like something died there and left a stain. Walking through those rooms knowing what happened upstairs makes me physically ill, and I have to stop twice to breathe and fight down the nausea. My bedroom looks exactly how I left it, but feels contaminated now. Every object connected to memories I can't trust anymore. I grab only essentials, stuffing clothes and my laptop and a few photos into garbage bags because I can't handle looking at any of it too long. Hallie asks about furniture and books and other belongings, and I tell her to donate or trash everything else because I want nothing from that place. She helps me carry the bags to her car, and I don't look back at the house when we drive away. Remy explains during our next meeting that the house is being seized as evidence and will eventually be sold through the court system. The proceeds will go to a victims fund he's establishing to help pay for therapy and medical care for the children my mother hurt. He tells me I'm technically entitled to inheritance as her daughter, but there are legal ways to refuse it if that's what I want. I sign papers that afternoon refusing any money connected to my mother, not wanting a single dollar that came from her or that house. Remy seems relieved and tells me the fund will make a real difference in the victims' lives, that choosing to give up that money shows remarkable character. I don't feel remarkable, just desperate to separate myself from anything she touched. Lorelai shows up at the safe house apartment the next week with a folder full of forms and information about victim compensation funds. She sits with me for 3 hours helping me fill out applications for housing assistance and education support, explaining that the FBI has programs specifically designed to help witnesses rebuild their lives after cases like this. She's patient when I get confused or overwhelmed by the paperwork, breaking everything down into simple steps and checking boxes with me. Her personal investment in my well-being feels like the first genuine care I've experienced in months, like she actually sees me as a person, and not just a witness or a victim. Before she leaves, she gives me her personal cell number and tells me to call anytime, even just to talk, and I actually believe she means it. 2 months after Tommy's rescue, Lorelai tells me he's been placed with a foster family who specializes in trauma care for rescued children. She asks if I want to meet him, says he knows who I am, and that it might help both of us to talk. I'm terrified at the idea because what do I even say to him? But I agree because I need him to know that I didn't know what she was doing, that I would have helped if I'd understood. Lorelai arranges a supervised meeting at a neutral location with Giovanna present, and she prepares me for what to expect, warning me that Tommy is very damaged and might not respond the way I hope. Meeting Tommy is harder than anything I've faced so far because he's so small and damaged in ways I can see just looking at him. We sit in a quiet room with Giovanna between us, and when he looks at me, I see fear mixed with something like pity, like he feels sorry for me discovering the truth about my mother. I try to apologize, but the words come out wrong and inadequate, and he just nods without saying anything back. We sit in uncomfortable silence for maybe 10 minutes before Giovanna suggests we take a break, and Tommy leaves with his foster mom without looking back at me. Giovanna tells me later that the meeting was important even though it felt awful, that Tommy needed to see me and hear my apology, and that small moment of acknowledgement mattered for both of us, even if it didn't feel like enough. 3 months after the initial charges, Remy calls to tell me my mother's trial date is set for 6 months out, but he expects she'll take a plea deal before then. He explains that some victims' families are demanding the death penalty, and the threat of that might push her to accept life without parole instead. He asks how I feel about a plea deal versus a trial, and I tell him I just want it over, that I can't handle sitting through a prolonged trial listening to details about what she did. Remy says he understands and will push for the plea, that sparing everyone from a trial is probably the best outcome even if it feels like she's getting off easy. I don't think life in prison sounds easy at all, but I also don't care what happens to her anymore as long as it ends. 2 weeks after my last meeting with Remy, he calls to tell me my father took a plea deal. 8 years in prison for being an accessory to my mother's crimes. I sit on the couch in the safe house apartment holding the phone, waiting to feel something other than this flat numbness. Remy explains that my father cooperated fully, gave them details about my mother's timeline and methods, described how she recruited victims and moved them between locations. He says the cooperation helped their case against her, made it stronger. I should feel satisfied that at least one parent is facing real consequences, but instead I just feel tired. My father knew children were suffering and did nothing, and 8 years seems like both too much and not enough punishment for that kind of failure. After I hang up, I stare at the wall for an hour, trying to remember a single moment when my father seemed like a good person, and I come up blank. Hallie shows up the next morning with paperwork and a set of keys. Victim Services found me a small apartment across town, 1 bedroom with basic furniture and a month-to-month lease they'll cover until I can work. She drives me there, and the building is old but clean, the kind of place where no one asks questions or remembers faces. My apartment is on the 3rd floor, window facing a brick wall, and it's the most private space I've ever had. Hallie helps me fill out forms to enroll in online high school so I can finish my education without walking into a building full of people who know my story. She sets up the laptop they're providing and shows me how to log into the system, and I realize I'm going to spend the next year alone in this apartment staring at a screen. The isolation feels necessary, though, like I need this distance from normal life while I figure out who I am now. After Hallie leaves, I sit in the empty living room, and the silence is so complete I can hear my own heartbeat. This is my life now, and I have no idea how to live it. 3 weeks later, Remy calls again. My mother accepted a plea deal to avoid trial. Life in prison without parole plus 200 years on multiple counts of kidnapping, child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and murder. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month, and he asks if I want to read a victim impact statement. My hands start shaking before he finishes the question, because standing in a courtroom and speaking about what she did means making it real in a way I've been avoiding. But I say yes anyway because the victims deserve to hear that someone in my family acknowledges the harm, even if I can't undo any of it. Remy sends me guidelines for the statement, and I spend days staring at the blank document trying to find words that capture this specific kind of betrayal. How do you explain discovering your mother is a monster? How do you talk about the guilt of sleeping peacefully while children suffered above you? The morning of the sentencing, I put on the only nice clothes I own, and Hallie drives me to the courthouse. We walk through metal detectors and down long hallways with fluorescent lights that make everything look harsh and overexposed. The courtroom is bigger than I expected. Wooden benches and a high judge's bench, and my mother sitting at a table in an orange jumpsuit. She looks smaller than I remember, older, her hair gray at the roots where the dye grew out. When I walk in, she turns and our eyes meet, and I feel absolutely nothing. This woman raised me for 16 years, and now she's a stranger, someone I barely recognize. I sit in the front row with Hallie while the judge reviews the charges and my mother's guilty plea, and the whole proceeding feels surreal and distant, like I'm watching it happen to someone else. When it's time for victim impact statements, Remy calls my name and I walk to the podium on shaking legs. I unfold my statement and start reading, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. I talk about the betrayal of learning everything I believed about my family was a lie. I talk about the confusion of trying to understand how the woman who made me breakfast could hurt children. I talk about the guilt of living in that house for years while kids suffered in the attic above me, about wondering what signs I missed and whether I could have stopped this sooner. My mother starts crying halfway through my statement, tears running down her face, but I keep reading without pausing. I have no tears left for her. Used them all up during the first weeks after everything fell apart. When I finish, I fold the paper and walk back to my seat without looking at her again. The judge sentences her, and it's over in minutes. This woman's entire life reduced to legal terminology and years that add up to forever. After the sentencing, Remy takes me to a private room where the surviving victims and their families are gathering. There are maybe 15 people total, some adults who were taken as children years ago, some parents of kids who didn't survive, some foster parents of children still recovering. We sit in a circle and take turns sharing our anger and pain and confusion, and being with people who understand this specific horror makes me feel less alone. A woman whose daughter died in my mother's captivity thanks me for coming forward even though it meant exposing my own family. Her gratitude feels wrong because I didn't do anything heroic, just stumbled onto the truth and made the only choice I could live with. But I accept it because refusing would hurt her more, and these people have been hurt enough already. We sit together for 2 hours, and by the end I feel connected to them in a way I'll never feel connected to anyone else. We're all rebuilding from the same wreckage, all carrying pieces of what my mother destroyed. Tommy's foster parents approach me as everyone's leaving. They're a quiet couple in their 50s who've been doing trauma foster care for years, and they tell me Tommy is doing better than expected. He's in therapy 3 times a week and starting to trust again, slowly opening up about what happened. They thank me for being brave enough to expose the truth, for choosing to help even when it cost me everything. Their words make my throat tight because I don't feel brave, just broken in different ways than Tommy. But I tell them I'm glad he's safe now, that he's getting the help he needs, and I mean it. When they leave, I sit alone in the empty room for a while, trying to process that this chapter is finally closed. My mother will die in prison, and my father will spend 8 years there, and Tommy is safe with people who actually care about him. It should feel like resolution, but instead it just feels like the end of one nightmare and the beginning of a different kind of struggle. Isabella and I work through my grief over the next months in her small office with the comfortable chairs and box of tissues I use every session. She helps me understand that I'm mourning a mother who's still alive but dead to me, grieving for the parent I thought I had who never actually existed. The woman who raised me was always capable of those crimes. I just didn't see it because she wore a different mask at home. Isabella says I can't change what happened, but I can choose how I move forward from here, that healing is possible even if it takes years. Some days I believe her and some days I don't, but I keep showing up to sessions because what else am I going to do? The work is slow and painful, peeling back layers of denial and facing truths I'd rather ignore. But after 6 months, I notice small changes, moments where the guilt doesn't crush me quite as hard, days where I can think about the future without feeling hopeless. It's not healing exactly, but it's the beginning of something that might eventually become healing if I keep at it long enough. 6 months after the sentencing, I'm doing better than anyone expected, including me. I'm still in therapy twice a week and still having nightmares most nights, but I'm also making real progress toward my GED and thinking about college applications. Lorelai checks in every couple weeks by phone or text, asking how I'm doing and offering help with anything I need. She's become something like a mentor, proof that trustworthy adults actually exist even though my parents weren't among them. She sends me information about criminal justice programs and victim advocacy organizations, suggesting paths I might take if I want to turn this experience into something useful. I'm not ready to make those decisions yet, but having options feels important, like my future isn't completely destroyed by my past. Some days are still terrible, hours where I can't stop thinking about the children who died because I didn't figure things out sooner. But other days are almost okay, and that's more than I had 6 months ago. I start volunteering with an organization that supports families of crime victims, using my experience to help other people process the impossible situation of loving someone who did terrible things. There's a support group for family members of perpetrators, and I sit in on meetings, sharing my story when it feels right and listening when it doesn't. Other people talk about their brothers who killed someone drunk driving, their fathers who embezzled money, their children who committed assault, and I recognize the same shame and confusion I carry. Helping them work through their feelings gives my suffering some kind of meaning, like maybe I can take this horror and transform it into something that helps others survive their own nightmares. It's not redemption, because I didn't do anything that needs redeeming, but it's purpose, and purpose is enough to keep me moving forward most days. Tommy and I develop a careful friendship through supervised meetings at his therapist's office once a month. We'll never be close because the connection between us is too painful and complicated, but there's understanding that no one else can provide. We're both rebuilding our lives from the wreckage my mother created, both learning to trust again after having that trust destroyed. He's doing better than I expected, laughing sometimes and talking about school and his foster siblings. Seeing him heal helps me believe that maybe I can heal too, that we're not permanently broken just because we survived something breaking. We don't talk much about my mother or what happened, mostly just sit together doing normal things like playing cards or watching movies. The shared experience creates a bond neither of us asked for, but both of us need, proof that we're not alone in understanding this specific kind of damage. I fill out the paperwork for the name change at the courthouse, my hands shaking as I sign documents that will erase the last connection to my mother's identity. The clerk processes everything without asking questions, probably sees this kind of thing all the time in cases like mine. When she stamps the final form and hands me the certificate, I stare at my new name on the official paper and feel something shift inside me. It's not relief exactly, more like the first real breath after being underwater too long. Walking out of the courthouse, I fold the certificate carefully and put it in my backpack, this small piece of paper that says I get to be someone new now. The journalist contacts me through Hallie 3 weeks later, explains she's writing a book about predators who hide in plain sight and wants to include my perspective. My first instinct is to refuse, to keep hiding from the public attention that still follows me sometimes. But Isabella says telling my story might help me reclaim some power over the narrative, might help other people recognize warning signs they're missing in their own lives. We spend 2 sessions preparing for the interview, Isabella coaching me on setting boundaries and protecting myself emotionally while still being honest. The journalist meets me at a coffee shop downtown, records our conversation on her phone while I talk for 3 hours straight. I tell her about the nightly visits, the padlock, the children's clothes, all the signs I missed because I trusted my mother completely. She asks hard questions about guilt and complicity, about whether I suspected anything before that final night. Answering feels like peeling off layers of skin, exposing raw places I usually keep covered. But there's something freeing about speaking the truth out loud to someone who will share it with the world. When we finish, she thanks me and says my courage will help countless families understand how manipulation works. I don't feel courageous, just exhausted and a little bit lighter than before. The acceptance letter arrives on a Tuesday morning. Thick envelope from a small college 3 states away that specializes in programs for trauma survivors. I got a full scholarship for victims of violent crime, everything covered including housing and books and meal plans. Reading the letter makes me cry for the first time in months. Not sad tears, but something closer to hope mixed with terror. Hallie helps me prepare for the move, taking me shopping for dorm supplies and helping me figure out what to pack from my sparse apartment. She promises to stay in touch through video calls and texts, says she'll always be available if I need support or just someone to talk to. The night before I leave, I can't sleep, lying awake thinking about starting over somewhere nobody knows my history or my mother's crimes. Part of me wants to tell everyone immediately, get the truth out there before they find out some other way. But another part wants to try being just a regular college student for a while, someone whose biggest problems are homework and roommate drama instead of trauma and guilt. I visit Tommy one last time before leaving, his foster parents welcoming me into their home with careful warmth. Tommy looks healthier than the last time I saw him, less haunted around the eyes, and he actually smiles when I suggest planting a tree together. We dig the hole in their backyard, Tommy's foster dad helping with the heavy work while Tommy and I take turns with the smaller shovel. The tree is young and fragile, a maple that will grow tall and strong if we plant it right. As we settle it into the ground and pack dirt around the roots, Tommy says the names of the children who didn't survive, the ones who died in my mother's captivity before anyone knew to look for them. I add water while he speaks, and his foster mom stands on the porch crying quietly. When we finish, Tommy and I stand looking at the small tree, and he reaches over and squeezes my hand for just a second. Neither of us says anything because there's nothing that would make this okay, but the tree feels important anyway, this living thing that will keep growing long after we've both moved on with our lives. His foster dad takes a picture of us standing next to it, and I save it on my phone even though looking at it hurts. My first semester is harder than I expected, juggling classes and homework while still going to therapy twice a week and managing nightmares that wake me up most nights. My roommate is nice but clueless about why I sometimes wake up screaming, and I make up stories about bad dreams from scary movies instead of explaining the truth. I join a study group for my psychology class and slowly start making friends who know nothing about my past, who see me as just another freshman trying to figure out college life. There's freedom in that anonymity, being able to laugh at stupid jokes and stress about exams without anyone looking at me with pity or fear. I tell my new friends my parents are dead, which feels true enough even though my mother is alive in prison and my father is serving his sentence. The distance from everything that happened helps me start building a new identity, someone who exists separately from the crimes and the trials and the media coverage. Some days I almost forget, can go hours without thinking about the attic or the children or my mother's face when they arrested her. Those moments of normalcy feel like small victories, proof that maybe I can have a life that isn't completely defined by trauma. Halfway through my first year, I declare my major as social work with a focus on child welfare. Isabella says during one of our video sessions that this choice shows remarkable strength, taking my pain and turning it into purpose for helping others. I'm not sure about remarkable, but I know I want to protect kids who can't protect themselves. Want to be the person who notices the signs that everyone else misses. My professors don't know my history, but they see my passion for the subject, the way I engage with every discussion about abuse prevention and family systems. I volunteer at a local organization that supports foster children, helping with homework and activities, and every kid I work with feels like a small act of redemption. It doesn't erase what happened or bring back the children who died, but it gives my suffering some kind of meaning beyond just surviving. Isabella reminds me that healing isn't linear, that I'll have bad days and setbacks, but choosing to help others is a sign of real growth and resilience. 2 years after my mother's sentencing, I'm doing better than anyone thought possible, including me. I'm maintaining good grades, made it onto the dean's list last semester, and built real friendships with people who genuinely care about me. I'm dating someone casually. Nothing serious, but proof that I can trust people enough to let them close. I work part-time with a local advocacy organization, speaking to community groups about recognizing signs of child abuse and supporting survivors. The trauma is still there, still shapes how I see the world and relate to people, but it doesn't crush me the way it did in those first months. I have tools now for managing the nightmares and the guilt, ways of coping that actually help instead of just numbing the pain. My therapist says I'm one of the most resilient people she's worked with, and while I don't always believe that, I can see the progress when I look back at where I started. The scared, broken girl who discovered her mother's crimes feels like a different person now, someone I remember but don't fully recognize anymore. The letter from Tommy arrives on a Wednesday. His handwriting's still a little messy but readable. He writes that his foster family officially adopted him last month, that he has a real family now who loves him and keeps him safe. He's doing well in the school, made the soccer team, has friends who make him laugh. At the end, he thanks me again for being brave enough to expose the truth, says he knows it cost me everything, but it saved his life, and probably others too. Reading his words, I sit on my dorm room bed and cry, but they're different tears than before, mixed up with relief and sadness, and something that might be forgiveness. I didn't save those children, and I can't undo the years they suffered, but I did stop it from continuing, did make sure my mother couldn't hurt anyone else. That small piece of redemption doesn't fix everything or make the guilt disappear, but it helps me believe that maybe I did something right in the worst situation anyone could imagine. I write back to Tommy that night, telling him I'm proud of him and glad he found a real family, that his happiness means more to me than he probably understands. When I mail the letter the next morning, I feel something like peace settling over me, not complete or permanent, but real enough to hold on to for now. That's the story for today. I'm so glad you were here to listen. It means more than you know. I hope it brought a small smile or a bit of calm to your day.